Welcome, everybody, to Indiana Basketball Weekly on the Grueling Truth Sports Network. I'm your host for Indiana Basketball Weekly, Mike Goodpaster. Right now, I'd like to welcome in my co-host, Kent Sterling. How you doing, Kent?
I am fat and happy. I feel great about life and Indiana basketball. We won a game on the road. The tide has turned.
Okay. Indiana is now 14 and 4, 4 and 3 in the Big Ten. They host Michigan State next. This is a game that Nebraska jumped off to a 23-14 lead, and I don't know about you, but I'm thinking, here we go again, just like Wisconsin.
You know what, though? Then something changed. And what changed for me happened when Archie Miller went to this lineup. He had Finney at the point, Franklin and Hunter at the wings, Trace Jackson Davis, and Joey Brunk down low. And all of a sudden, pop, 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 shot bucket. Pop, 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 shot bucket. They moved the ball. They cut crisply. They set good screens. And then they knocked down shots. And when they went to that group, I saw it turn. And then when they pulled that group, which I thought was way premature, but okay, the guys who came in, they kind of continued that. And so I started to feel pretty good about what they were doing offensively. Now, it bears mention that Nebraska is not a terribly good defensive team. They can't shoot. And Indiana may have made shots that normally they wouldn't. And I'm really talking specifically about Joey Brunk a little bit. But I thought when they went to that lineup, the tide kind of changed, and all of a sudden Indiana became an offensive team that ran their stuff to its natural conclusion and knocked down shots.
Yeah, and I think you look at against Rutgers, Indiana only had 6 assists. The ball movement here really stood out to me because this is a team that compiled a season-high 21 assists with Trace Jackson Davis, Franklin Finney, and Devontae Green all contributing 4 apiece. So I think the big thing is what you've already talked about is the ball movement and where it went from a lack of ball movement to they were moving the ball around a lot better in this game.
You know, it's funny how that works. When you move the ball, the defense has to work. And when the defense has to work, one of those 5 guys is going to miss an assignment, and you've got an open look. And that's what's wrong with shooting, unless you're in transition, shooting way early in the shot clock because you're making it easy on the defense. Make them work a little bit, make some passes, especially if they're allowing you easy passes from the point to the wing and then from the wing down low. If you can do that against a team, you got a really good chance to create some kind of imbalance, and out of that imbalance comes an open shot.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that roster did, not just with the ball movement, was also defensively because they had a hard time defending the Cornhuskers that first part of the game. And when they went to that defense, the defense, especially on the ball and at the perimeter, was a lot better.
It really was. It looked like a basketball team all of a sudden. And that was the moment I've been looking for. And as we've been watching Indiana, we wanted to see a group that could be functional. And that group of 5 really started to function. And then just like shooting can be contagious, I think ball movement can be contagious. And once guys see that somebody's playing the right way, I think it becomes easier for everybody to play the right way. And I think that was enough to carry him against Nebraska.
Yeah, and I think doing it well can be contagious. Doing it bad can be contagious.
Yep.
And when you look at it, they shot 51% from the field, which is about 25% better than what they usually do. And still, defensively, this is a team that I think has actually evolved into a really good defensive team.
You know, they've been playing good defense. And even if you look at the Rutgers game, which they lost, they only allowed Rutgers to score, 59 points or whatever, and that's fine. And you look at the field goal percentage against, it's always pretty good. They don't create a lot of turnovers, which is too bad. But that defense, I haven't yelled at anybody on the defensive side of the ball in a couple of weeks. And usually I yell because somebody gets lost, whether it's Devontae Green, whether it's Justin Smith, kind of gets lost. Maybe something happened on the previous possession offensively where they've kind of got their head down a little bit and they kind of forget where they're supposed to be. Or, and I don't know who's teaching this I yell at quite a bit, and I didn't at all against Nebraska. I really get upset with guys who backpedal in defensive transition. I don't understand that. Anybody who's watched a minute of basketball understands that you sprint back to the foul line and you find your guy. You sprint back. You don't backpedal back. You sprint back and you beat your guy down there, and then you pick him up. And Indiana, for a long time, just would kind of backpedal as fast as they needed to instead of sprinting back. And I think against Nebraska, we saw kind of a different focus on that, which made me happy.
Well, I'm going to tell you this, Kent. My mom used to tell me this when I was a young boy. They can't hear you, Michael. It's over the TV. Don't scream. So,
yeah.
Well, she used to all the time. She'd go, you realize they can't hear you, right?
That does me no good. I tell my wife that all the time. She'll yell about basketball as much as I do. I'm like, Julie, what are you doing? Or she'll yell like an episodic TV program. I'll say, Julie, for God's sake, first of all, it's the product of a writer's imagination. Second of all, this thing was filmed a long time ago. Third of all, what are you doing? The technology doesn't exist for you to affect their behavior. And then she gets very upset. And then we have a bit of a fight. And then it all calms down and things go back to normal around here.
Then you realize there's no way you're ever going to win that fight anyway, so you might as well just secede from the fight.
Yeah, just smile and move on to the next thing.
Yeah, I find myself yelling at Andy Griffith episodes.
Well, Otis T. Campbell. Otis Campbell's a guy who's got an issue. We all know what that is. And, for God's sake, Otis, stop spending Saturday night in a Who's Cow.
Yeah, but, he gets out in time for church on Sunday. The bad thing is there's nothing new on TV I want to watch anymore. And me and my wife find ourselves watching Archie Griffith or Andy Griffith all the time.
The Archie Griffin show, that was an entirely different thing. But, yeah, and they never stopped putting on Andy Griffith. It's one episode after another, and that's why I stick to sports. I'm watching basketball every night, whether it's Indiana or the Pacers tonight. Butler and Purdue play simultaneously. So I got my night filled without having to worry about, the next episode of L.A. Law or whatever's coming on next.
All right, but the next episode of Indiana basketball is going to be very interesting as the Indiana Hoosiers will host Michigan State. And Michigan State, I think, is a team a lot of people thought might be the best team in the country, led by Cassius Winston. They haven't been, especially on the road so far this year. Indiana, this is a game I think they can get. And if they do, and they're sitting at 15-4 and a couple games above 500, everything changes.
You know what? They played a lot of games at home in the Big Ten, and Michigan State has. And the one that they've lost since December 8th was against Purdue, at Purdue. That's the only they also played in December. They had Northwestern at Northwestern's place, but they only won that game by 5. So you're exactly right. This is a game that maybe can be had, but Michigan State is really, really good. And when you look at that roster, even for a passive fan of college basketball, when you see Cassius Winston and Xavier Tillman and Aaron Henry and Rocket Watts, this is a team with a lot of firepower, a lot of defensive athleticism, and it's kind of the sort of team that Indiana can have trouble with. But Indiana's coming off a season where they beat Sparty twice, so who knows?
Yeah, the thing that stands out to me, though, is there's a lot of wins here recently, but like you said, they're all at home. And that loss to Purdue wasn't just a loss on the road. That was 71-42 to a Purdue team that I think is very average, but well coached.
And I kept thinking that somehow or another Michigan State was going to sort of rally and find itself and begin to attack successfully, and it just never happened. Purdue got off to a great start, buried Michigan State. I think at one point it was like 32-12. And then it just kept getting worse for Michigan State until that final score, which was, I think, as bad a loss as Tom Izzo's ever had at Michigan State. And, if Michigan, what we've got to hope is that Izzo didn't use that to correct a lot of bad behavior, especially bad behavior on the road. But we know better, and we know that Tom Izzo's smart enough to do that, and that they're going to come ready to play on Thursday night against an Indiana team that now – maybe it's kind of found itself a little bit, and it's starting to figure some things out at the right time.
Yeah, and the thing that stood out to me about their game against Wisconsin, where Michigan State beat Wisconsin by 12, was Cassius Winston only scored 6 points, but you had 4 other guys in double figures, and 3 of those guys were forwards with Aaron Henry, Gabe Brown, and Xavier Tillman. So this is a team that I think they can beat you with the backcourt because you've got one of the best guards in the country. But up front, they're pretty solid also.
They are, and they're really deep. And Tom Izzo's an absolutely terrific coach. And so, like you said, there's some things against Indiana, but there's some things for Indiana. According to Ken Palm, Michigan State 8th in the country, Indiana's 40th. But this is an opportunity in both these games coming up this week against Michigan State at Simon Scott Assembly Hall, and then Sunday against Maryland. These are really interesting games for IU in that if you win those games, you've got Michigan State at 8th in the Ken Palm, Maryland at 12th. Those are both going to be really good resume wins if Indiana can find a way to hold home court at Assembly Hall. And there's, you know what? Look, it works both ways, right? We always look at home games at Assembly Hall like, oh, my God, they're playing a really good team. But then we look at Indiana or anybody else when they go on the road in the Big Ten, and we say, boy, winning in the Big Ten on the road is really, really tough. Well, you know what? It's tough for those guys, too. And where is there a better home court advantage than at Assembly Hall?
Actually, from what I've seen, I was going to name a few off, but
yeah, look, yeah, I know what you're saying. I know Illinois beat the living hell out of Purdue at Champaign, and Purdue beat the living hell out of Michigan State at West Lafayette. But Indiana doesn't lose very often at Assembly Hall either.
Well, Arkansas beat them.
Yeah, that game. You know what? I had put that entirely out of my head because that's the way I operate. You know, it's bad things. I tend to delete that file and move forward.
All right. Half full. All right. So when we look at this, you've got two big games coming up here. I think if they get a split, they're sitting pretty good.
Yes.
A sweep, and they're sitting real good. But on the other hand, you lose two, and I think there's major issues. But I think the way this team has played has given me some hope, just because even though they've got a gauntlet the rest of the schedule, when you play defense as well as Indiana is, they will at least keep you in those games. And I think that, I hate to say this because we rip him all the time, but the difference in being able to beat Michigan State and Maryland may be number 11.
It could be. And you know, Devontae Green, as you look at him statistically, you don't see the same problems that we see with our eyeballs as we watch games. His turnover rate really not altogether that high compared to his teammates. He's the best three-point shooter on the team, although it does kind of come in waves. But we know what happens with Devontae Green periodically, and every game is not going to be the Florida State game for the kid, where if he doesn't score his 30 and isn't as productive and efficient as he was during that game, Indiana doesn't win that game. I really think I'm looking at the next 8 games because they play 2 at home, then 2 on the road, then 2 at home and 2 on the road. I'm looking at those 8 games. They need to win 4 of those. If they can split those next 8, right, and they're only favored in the home game against Purdue. All the other games, they're either slight underdogs like they are coming up to Thursday night against Michigan State, or they're kind of extreme underdogs like they are at Ohio State on February 1st. I want them to go 4-4. If they go 4-4, all of a sudden they're 8-7. You've got those 2 games at Assembly Hall at the end of the season against Minnesota and Wisconsin. That gives you the 10 you need. You've got a home game also against Penn State where you're favored to win. You've got a chance at 11-9 if somehow, some way, you can go 4-4 over the next 8.
Well, and the thing is this, Ohio State's not as scary even if it's at Ohio State right now the way they're playing.
That's a really interesting team because I thought that they were playing about as well as anybody in the country when they beat Villanova because they took Jay Wright to the woodshed. And I thought, holy cow, I texted Chris Holtman. I said, man, you guys are really good. And then, like always, he texts back and says, well, no, we're really not. No. We got to know each other a little bit when he was at Butler.
Oh, come on. That was funny, though, Kent.
It was funny. It was funny. But he always says, you know, we're not nearly as good as you think we are. But every coach says that in every exchange that you have about that. No coach says, you know what, you're right. We're pretty damn good. But in this case, I think Chris was right that Ohio State's not nearly as good as their November wins kind of showed themselves to be.
Well, I think a lot of that is it's harder to win in conference. You know, you're playing Villanova, you don't know as each other as well. And Villanova's a really well-coached team, but it's early in the year. They were a little young this year. And we've seen Villanova continue to get better. with Ohio State, I think it's a lot different when you get into conference. It's just like if you watch the AFC Championship or the NFC Championship game on Sunday, if that would have been the Seattle Seahawks against the 49ers, it's probably a 3-point game either way because the teams know each other so well. It's hard to really get a huge advantage in a game like that.
And once you start playing those games, there's not a South Dakota State to break it up or UConn's 78th in Ken Palm, but not a UConn. What Indiana's got from this point forward, the lowest rated team that they will battle during this last stretch of the season is Illinois at number 36. So you're going up against a top 40 team every single night, and preparing for that kind of relentless gauntlet, as you put it, is really difficult, especially for kids who are going through winter and you got flu and you got studies and you got all this stuff that might detract from their ability to kind of prepare for these games. You know what? You don't get any nights off, and you don't get to go out and practice really, really hard 3-4 days a week like you do in November and really prepare for a team in the way you can during November. This is it's relentless and it's fun, and it's why we watch.
All right. So they're going to beat Michigan State, Kent?
I do. I think that they are. I picked them to beat Nebraska. I think that they're going to win a second in a row. And I think that this is a team. I think Archie Miller's kind of figured a few things out. And as you look at the usage of the bench, he's going deeper with his starters. He's trusting those guys to play 32, 35 minutes, guys like Justin Smith. And I think that that's key for this team. And I really think that it's the difference between a team like Indiana and Illinois. Illinois, we're going to see tonight play at Mackey Arena against Purdue. And Illinois does not go deep in the bench. They don't play a lot of bench minutes. Indiana has throughout the season, but it's fewer and fewer and fewer. And I don't know what Archie was trying to do throughout, like the first 15 games of the season where all 11 guys played and nobody was exposed to too many minutes. But I'm glad we're seeing it change and evolve toward kind of a lineup that is predictable and that he's running deep into games with, because I think that that's essential. And I think a guy like Jerome Hunter is absolutely critical for Indiana. If they're going to turn the corner and they're going to win games to the point where they get to 11-9 in the Big Ten, I think Jerome Hunter's got to be a big part of it, and I think he's going to be a big part of it Thursday night.
Well, see, the other thing that makes me feel a little bit better is when they got up 19 against Nebraska, they went cold and couldn't buy a shot for 10 minutes.
Yep.
In the past, when that's happened, it seemed like the defense dropped off with it, where in this game, I think the defense continued to play at a high level, which was able to keep them with a comfortable lead the rest of the game.
And I think that that's how Archie's looking at these guys. And as we look at the usage of the bench guys and we look at people coming in off the bench and we're like, what the hell is this guy doing back in the game? I think all of those decisions are being made based upon what they do defensively. That if they look active defensively, if they don't let a bad offensive possession contribute to a bad defensive possession, I think Archie rewards that. I think it's all about defense with him, and that's what we're seeing rewarded. I think you're absolutely right that this team has kind of figured it out. They've developed a toughness. Oof, that didn't sound right coming out of my mouth.
We'll find that out Thursday.
I think so, but I think, you know what, they do against Rutgers. We talked about it last week, but they were getting outplayed all over the floor, and they were still down 8, midway through the second half, and I think with about 5 minutes left in the game. And I thought, how in the hell are they only down 8 points? But if you play great defense and you limit their scoring opportunities, you can be a little bit unsure of yourself offensively, and you can miss some shots and still stay in games. I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah, and when you're in a league where it's hard to win on the road, the easiest way to win on the road is playing defense.
And that goes the other way, right? Where you're at home, hopefully these rims are a little bit kinder to Indiana than they were at Rutgers, at least. They were plenty kind, I thought, against Nebraska. But, a little home cooking after a couple of games on the road, I think, and a long week a little bit. They had the game on Saturday, not another game until Thursday, so it gives them a little bit of time to get their legs underneath them. It's nice to have a few days off, and I expect Indiana to play well on Thursday night.
Well, Rutgers, those rims were like the old fair where you'd shoot a free throw and you knew the ball was the same size as the hoop.
Yeah, just about.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's kind of the same thing. And then the old dirty guy that's standing there smoking a cigarette, drinking a beer, that would take your money and have you shoot the ball, would swear to God it wasn't. And then for some reason, he could go up with one hand and just lay it in every time.
There is an art to that, but all you have to do is go to the fair, walk by that booth, and see all the animals that are pinned to the side of the cage, count them, and then come back 3 hours later and count them again, and maybe he'll have given away one. You know what I mean? You got to do the math and understand just exactly how hard that is, because it's not like shooting a free throw at all at normal. First of all, it's like 12 or 14 feet high.
Yeah.
And then they're teeny tiny, and the balls are overinflated to where they're about to pop in your hand.
Yeah. I always found it was easier to bank it in.
If you've got a nice high arc, the higher you come at the rim, the better a chance you got at making it. And so my son, who played basketball, we would take him to the fair, and he was good for about 50% on those rims, and then he'd get run off. Like we'd win two big animals, and then it was time for us to leave. Yeah, that was over. And there's no way to hide them. Like you can't put those in. That's not like winning a watch you can kind of put in your pocket.
And they remember you because those guys have photographic memories. Or photographic memories.
They're not gifted intellectually, but when it comes to people winning their animals, they all of a sudden become
now
geniuses.
Don't make fun of them and say that just because they're, what do they call them, carnies at the fair or whatever?
Hey, if we can't make fun of carnies, what's happened with the world? If we can't engage in a little bit of mockery at their expense.
Well, maybe we should do a live remote from the Aurora Farmers Fair in October of next year, and maybe we can sit there and shoot the game, and we'll put it on YouTube.
And we will not make fun of them to their faces, because those are dangerous individuals.
I will, because almost every one of them seems like they
pasts.
have a peg leg, though. So you could run from them and be all right.
Hard to run from a bullet, though.
See, I think this is what pirates have evolved into over the years.
Carnies are the new pirates.
Yeah, because when I was little, usually they had an eye patch and a little cane, and it was the same thing. Of course, maybe they were faking that because they were just wanting one of us little snot-nosed kids to say something to them. They'll throw the cane down, take the patch off, and run you down and beat you to death.
There is definitely a reason that they have those jobs. Whatever it is, I'm not casting judgment. But there's a reason that they have those jobs and that they aren't attorneys.
I think you're casting judgment.
It's exactly what I'm doing.
I'll tell you what.
If at the front end, if you say you're not, if you deny that you are, some people just don't listen closely enough to even understand what you're doing.
Well, and the good thing is most carnies probably don't have internet, do they?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Yeah, if they got a phone, it's a flip phone, so it's not like they can get on and listen to it anyways.
And they got a wrench in case the Ferris wheel falls apart or the tilt-a-whirl, throws a cart into the middle of next week. They've got those things. But, wireless access to the Internet, I don't think is a requirement for being a good carny.
See, I only played the games at those places because I never rode the rides because they terrified me just from the looks of the people that were running them. I was pretty sure that they weren't put together right.
That is a level of prudence that I'm sure has served you well in your life.
That, and I don't like heights either.
No, well,
but then you would get the part where, like, the hot girl wants you to go on one of the rides with her, and you don't want to look like a little girl because then,
Yeah, I just whatever. And this continues with my wife today. Whatever she says we need to do, we absolutely do that thing. I have talk about a long and checkered history. My history of accommodating the needs of women, long and illustrious.
Well, everybody's is, or you're dead by now. Or you're like John Wayne Bobbitt and you're a couple pounds lighter.
That's what you learn in college too, right? You say no to a woman a couple of times about something, and you learn very quickly that that's a bad idea and that you need to moderate maybe at least the content of or the tone of your message, if not necessarily the content.
Actually, I learned that from watching my mom and dad when I was growing up. Because my mom and dad, they would disagree, and then finally my mom would get up, walk into the bathroom and shut the door, and she would not come out until my dad apologized to her through the door.
Really?
Yeah, that's what I learned, and it just wasn't worth it. You might as well
No.
just apologize before they go in the bathroom.
Well, and you know what? How many fights are really worth having? How many arguments are worth the time and effort that they take to engage in? Just say yes and move on with your day. Be accommodating, bring comfort to those you love, and off you go.
Yeah, there's no use in arguing. There's too much fighting in the world.
Way too much. And I'm glad, not to bring it back to Indiana, but that Indiana seems to be a much tighter group of guys this year for whatever reason. A great story by Dustin DePirac in the Athletic about how Justin Smith and Joey Brunk have been really good mentors for Trace Jackson Davis. It's nice to see the upperclassmen kind of putting their arms around a freshman this year as opposed to what happened last year and, help these guys become better players rather than put them in a position where they can't compete nearly as well as you would have hoped.
Well, and the great thing about Trace Jackson, though, is I don't think he necessarily needed that help, but it doesn't hurt because Trace Jackson, to me, is one of the few freshmen I've seen at Indiana over the last decade that seems like he's not a freshman as soon as he walks through the door.
And a guy who's also that and isn't headed straight to the league, or doesn't project, I don't know, maybe at the end of his junior year, if not next year, but certainly not this year. So you've had guys like, Thomas Bryant, who I think left after 2, Noah left after his freshman year. The guys, it doesn't seem like Trace just came to Indiana in order to get to the league as quickly as he could, which, that was also the case for Romeo. He was looking to get to the league, and that kind of repelled some guys on the team. Maybe Romeo was so sure of his gifts that he didn't accommodate those who were trying to help him, and there's no way to repel a teammate, a leader, more quickly than by rejecting his offers to help. We don't know exactly what happened behind closed doors.
Yeah, but I can guess that you're probably not too far off there when it comes to Romeo.
And I think there was probably some jealousy, where Romeo was coming in. He was the anointed one.
Yeah, he was like the Beatles showing up in Bloomington.
Yeah, and like if you're a member of the Birds, how about Paul Revere and the Raiders? If you're Paul Revere and the Raiders over here and the Beatles are over there, you don't like the Beatles very much if you're a member of Paul Revere and the Raiders.
Okay. Now, you do know that like 67% of our audience is now Googling Paul Revere and the Raiders.
And I hope they start trending because Paul Revere and the Raiders left a canon of wonderful pop music behind that is undervalued. And I think people who discover them are going to find their sound just to be magical.
What do you think about the Monkees?
Oh, the Monkees. They were, the Monkees were kind of what talk radio has become. Just homogenized pop crap designed to make the corporate guys a whole bunch of money.
Oh, but Davy Jones was on the Brady Bunch.
He was on the Brady Bunch, and sadly he's passed away. He was actually a wonderful talk radio guest, speaking of talk radio. He rode horses as a jockey well into his 50s, which is sort of odd. And I thought he was kidding when he said he did, but as it turned out, not.
Well, there's our interesting fun fact today you learned on the Indiana Basketball Weekly Show.
There you go. Who thought that we were going to learn Davy Jones was a jockey at one point in his career, even while being famous while talking IU basketball? These are the surprises that keep people coming back, Mike.
Oops. You want to tell everybody where they can find the book? Oops.
Absolutely. You can go to Amazon. How about we make it simple? You can go to a lot of places, but go to Amazon.com and search Kent Sterling, and you'll see the yellow and red cover for Oops. It's a 37-chapter tome of mistakes and adventures that I've had and what I learned from them, so you don't have to make those same mistakes as you learn your lessons. And at the same time, hopefully, you realize that mistakes are really the fun part of life.
As long as they don't cost you your life, yeah.
Well, that's the key. I mean, don't hurt others and don't hurt yourself.
Hey, another way to get the book,
mistakes.
Another way to get the book would probably be easier. Just drive up to Kent's house, because if you listen to Breakfast with Kent, you'll see that right on his mantle, he's got 5 or 6 books.
You could. Let's go.
All right.
Stop by. I encourage visitors.
Why don't you go ahead and give out your address,
No,
Kent?
I don't.
I'm kidding.
I give. Yeah, please stop by. Say hello. We'll have a cup of coffee and chat.
But
great.
Check out Kent's book, Oops. It's well worth the price of admission on Amazon. Also, Kent, every morning on Breakfast with Kent. Plus, you got a website, too, Kent, where you do a little opining from time to time.
Yeah, KentSterling.com. I wrote about Devontae Green yesterday and how we need to get off his ass.
Oh, it was just you. Media. Don't say we.
I mean everybody. I mean the collective, like IU fans who go on Twitter and moan about Devontae. Do you think it does the kid any good? Do you think it makes the experience of playing basketball any better for him? Do you think that recruits don't look at the way a guy like Devontae Green, a senior, is treated by fans and think, you know what? I really don't want any part of this crap. Absolutely they do. It serves no purpose. You can yell at the TV like me and vent. You don't need to do it on social media. I got a nice note from an IU player's mom who said I hit the nail right on the head and thanked me for writing. I appreciated it. It was the mother of a player who doesn't get a lot of crap on social media, but I appreciated it nonetheless. And I hope that fans, like, we gotta kind of. I got a note from a guy on Twitter, or a guy tweeted at me and said all Devontae Green cares about is putting up ESPN highlight type plays. And how the hell do we know what his motivation is? How do we know that this is a kid who just wants to get on ESPN? It's preposterous. We got to stop thinking for these kids, understand they're 22 and accommodate some mistakes, at least publicly, if not privately.
All right. Well said, Kent. Check out Kent Sterling at KentSterling.com. We will erase all of our old shows where maybe one of us said something bad about him. But, hey, this is the thing. We learn from our mistakes, Kent.
That's right. That's right. No more crapping on Devontae.
If he goes 0 for 20 from the field against Michigan State, you just may have to rewrite the article.
That's 14 minutes, 0 for 4, 2 turnovers, and a foul. Do that again, and we're coming at you strong.
Yeah, that's just the way it's got to be. Friday, 2 o'clock, Kent?
Yeah, let's go.
All right, Friday we'll talk about Indiana beating Michigan State. And all of a sudden looking like they might be contenders to win a Big Ten championship. So check us out Friday at 2 o'clock. Make sure you check out Kent Sterling at KentSterling.com. Follow The Grueling Truth at Grueling Truth on Twitter. But for now, for Kent Sterling, I'm Mike Goodpaster. You've been listening to The Grueling Truth, where the legends speak.